I think right now it's like the early days of the web. I think if you get your business profile in place and you get your content very clear and have it more quantitative based, so that I can save you X% by following my product, you're more likely to stand out than doing a very qualitative, lengthy, verby, verbose kind of answer. Hi, I am James Hocking. This is SEO in 2025 Additional Insight.
James, what's your additional insight for SEO in 2025?
It's that all the AI, so Perplexity, the Bing, Copilot, Chatgpt, they all use Bing as their web search engine.
So why do they use Bing as their search engine, and what do SEOs need to do about this?
I think originally, because I've been following it for a number of years now, and originally they were using Google. I think as Gemini came along and Google introduced AI Overview, they slowly banned, I would say, these other AIs from using the Google AI engine, is my observation. And they've moved over to Bing. So I think all of them, just to digress ever so slightly, all of the large language models, the generative AI, the Copilot, they're essentially a language engine. So they understand spoken language rules really, really well, but they're very expensive to train, and not just in money, but in time. It's a very time costly activity. So in order to keep them up to date, they have to use another source, which is ultimately a search engine. So when you write in your query and you want, what's happening in the news today, can you summarize it? It has to get that from somewhere. And so they rely on a search engine such as Bing. On their own, all they have is what they learned, 6 months ago, 1 year ago, depending which one you're using.
So why do Google not want these LLMs, these AI answer engines to use their results? And is Bing likely to go on the same train and not wish their results to be used?
I think it's a very interesting question, especially, as recent as 1 week ago, third parties such as Cloudflare have introduced a new mechanism where you kind of pay per scrape in a way for these engines. I've got my thoughts rather than definitive facts. I think for me, it's a bit like if you have a robots.txt file, you might find, why is my site not being scraped or being indexed, in the traditional search, and you realize your robots.txt file is preventing it. I think with Google, because, since about the late 90s, they've owned around 98% market share of the search. Now it's dropped down to 90. Now, you could argue that some of that drop is the same people using Google, but relying on the AI overviews that Google creates. And so my supposition or my belief is that Google are trying to own this space. They have done with search. And so they have a very rich capital of information in their search results. Bing, on the other hand, I would say even with the introduction of Chatgpt around 2023, where Copilot kind of became richer, in the desktop market, they only grew to about 12% of the desktop market share, and they have even less of the mobile market share. So I think, from my personal belief, is that Bing is probably more open to being scraped because they're still cementing their position as the de facto search engine.
So if we're assuming that Bing remains open to being scraped, what do SEOs need to do, if at all, slightly differently, to rank on Bing over Google?
When I've met with people, when I've spoken with my customers, Bing is something they say, do you use Bing? No. So do you want to invest in optimizing for Bing? Or do you want to optimize for Google? The preferences tends to be Google. I think the lessons we've learned for Google are completely transferable over to Bing. I mean, they make rules changes just like Google does. And so depending which type of business you are, if you're a small business and your main kind of catchment area is the local area that you're operating within, then it's things like getting your business profile on Bing as good as it possibly could be, as relevant as it possibly could be. when you kind of, just as you may have done for Google business. Similarly, when you want to get optimized for generative engine optimization, how do you make sure that, say, Chatgpt or Perplexity recommends your business in a AI response over someone else's? Then the type of information that you share has to be in a form that works well for that type of tool. And so with the large language models, they, despite their ability to understand the spoken language, the AI fundamentally at its core likes numbers over text. So when you start trying to describe yourself in a business context, you can then say, I service customers with a market cap of 1 million annualized revenue. So that's a number that the AI can filter on, and it's very good at doing that. When you get into a more textual or what is a kind of more essay responses, whilst the AI is very good at summarizing that, if you're trying to stand out from your competition, you then get kind of lost in the weeds, so to speak. So you really kind of want to make sure that your Bing profile is as good as it possibly be, your business profile is as good as possible be. The fact that, say, this is me as a business, this is my company registration number, this is things that stand me out as being a real business as opposed to something that isn't, you will gain prominence in that form. And that's before you even start thinking about your content. I think with a lot of these AI, they're trying to say, look, we are a place where you can get good facts, and that's a good starting place for Bing. And then similarly with your keywords and the way you would compete for those, it's a very similar process to what you've done with Google. It's just you're going to do it with Bing as well.
Great. Okay. And obviously it's the Google business profile, but for Bing, I believe it's called Bing Places for Business.
I couldn't comment. My background is data and getting data ready for AI. And I've been in large language models since the late, around 2018, 2019. So I came into this by being knowledgeable in large language models and data as opposed to pure SEO. And so I then ventured into SEO out of coincidence because it became popular. So I believe you're right, but I wouldn't like to say I'm a Bing SEO expert.
Yeah, yes, absolutely. It's available over at bingplaces.com as somewhere that you can actually submit your business details to the Bing search engine. But I mean, with regards to the information that the tools that you were talking about, Copilot, Chatgpt, Perplexity, take from Bing, what specifically would you say that they're likely to take from Bing?
So there's a process called RAG, and it's a retrieval augmented generation, and it's a technique that these tools use. And what it means is I'm going to go off to a number of different sources that I believe to be, I know nothing at the LLM knows nothing at this point about what's authoritative and things like that. So what you will find is that when you type in a prompt into, say, Copilot, it will go off and perform a number of web search queries. It won't do a single one, it will do a number. And what it will do is it will take your original question and it will create different versions of that question, a bit like the semantic search that you get with traditional search. So looking for similarities. It will go off and run, let's say for discussion, it runs 10 separate queries. It doesn't really care so much about the ranking of the result, only that it's looking for things that are semantically similar to what your question is. And when it finds them, it will collect those and it will then go into a process of summarizing that in order to work out how to make the best answer. So this is why sometimes when you get a citation and a response, it may or may not be a top ranking result if you did the search yourself.
So when you say it doesn't have to be a top ranking result, I assume that there's a certain cutoff. I mean, are we talking about it has to rank within the top 10 results, 20, or is there any particular number that you can share?
I found it's variable. In some of our experiments that we've run, it's been up in the top 50 results. So it's gone for the first couple of pages. More often than not, it sticks with the first page that we found. But whether it chooses, it doesn't really care whether it's rank 1, rank 2, rank 3. It's just looking based on the prompt that was entered by the user, what is semantically similar. And so this is where you kind of get things like the cosine similarity. that some SEOs may perform to see, is this piece of text similar to that piece of text? And if they are, then there's an assumption that the piece of text I've pulled out for web page is going to be relevant to answer. Now, I was going to say the biggest challenge is that with a large language model is that the way you phrase the question, you may phrase the question one way to get the same result, and I may phrase it a slightly different way, looking for the same result. And this is why keywords matter less than traditional search, is because the way the large language model works is that the way it interprets the question could be different, even though to you and I, the question is ultimately asking the same thing. And what these large language models are good at, they're good at generating sequences and predicting sequences. And if you think of it that way, so then if you take your input question as a sequence of words, what it predicts next is very dependent on the order in which you kind of ask the question. To be slightly facetious, if I kind of ask the question in a slightly Yoda way, where I kind of use words slightly backwards, I've actually given the probability of what it would predict next will be different because the order in which the words got fed into the LLM is different. So then coming back to what you said, how do I know which pages I will work, or how many will it feed from? It really depends on how many kind of similarity matches it finds in the search results, the traditional search results.
It's funny because people might have traditionally searched in a more Yoda-ish way, as you put it, in that they've perhaps used a shorter tail keyword phrase to begin with and added words to that to try and get more defined results, certainly. The other question that I was going to ask you actually related to whether or not you felt it was a good idea to have a different web page for every single query that you're attempting to answer on your website, or whether it's just as effective for AI search engines to find the answer on a page that happens to have thousands of words on it.
It's an interesting one. I think we're experimenting with both sides. Now, the way a large language model works is that, believe it or not, a large language model, all AI is deterministic. What I mean by that is that given the same input, you could guarantee the same output. Now, there's lots of people who are going to be screaming at the podcast thinking that is nonsense, because if I send in the same query, even if you did it programmatically using Python, there is an attribute where you can change the randomness of the response. The thing is that the large language model is wrapped with a piece of software, and that's the bit that wraps it is the bit that creates the randomness, not the model itself. When it comes down to, in order for the large language model to work out, if you had one supermassive web page, the challenge is that unless that web page is organized in a very, very clear way, it's very difficult for the large language model it's just going to work out which piece of text on this page is relevant. You may have 2 points on that page that could be quite far apart. And depending on which model you're using, it may be tuned to support that, or it may not. So let me put that another way. Some models in the SEO, some large language models have been trained on web pages. So they understand HTML. So they understand what a main tag is, they understand what an article tag is, and things like that. Other models haven't. They've been trained on just bodies of text or corpuses of text. They don't understand HTML. And so their ability to read HTML and pull out the salient bit is almost impossible. It will either not find it or it find it. And certainly the way large language models read web pages, they don't understand JavaScript. So if you've got a lot of your content embedded in JavaScript with mouse overs and doing these kind of really funky things, the LLM will just think, there's nothing here for me to read because I haven't executed JavaScript. I'm not going to do that. So we'll move on. To your question, should you have one supermassive page and one not supermassive page? The way you really want to be is you want a piece of content that is really on point. So in the past, we used to think, how do I get that? How do I get that people also asked type piece of text where, when Google started saying, oh, this is the answer to your question, I pulled it from this web page. You want to think of it in a similar way. because you want to say, given this question that the person's asked a large language model, it's going to perform that semantic similarity in this case, saying which body of text is the same. Now, where in the web page should you put that piece of text? We're experimenting with that, and it's kind of changing. But for the most part, you want to put it in a really easy place, so it doesn't have to scan through lots of text. You can just pull it from the top. And so to your question, should you have one long page? It really depends what model you're using. Some like longer pages, some like shorter pages. So Chatgpt operates differently from Perplexity, for example. However, last year, a new, not really a standard yet, but it stands for LLMS.text, and there's another one called LLMS-full.text. And these are pages which are formatted in Markdown, kind of markup. And they're a way where you can start organizing your content in a way that is very targeted towards how the large language model will look. Now, the catch is at the moment, there's no large language model that's actively looking for these files. But if you included them within your prompt, you would get to your customer would get to the response very fast, rather than relying on the large language model to try and interpret what your web page looked like and how it was organized.
James, what's the key takeaway from the tip you shared today?
The key takeaway, I think right now, it's like the early days of the web. I think if you get your business profile in play and you get your content very clear and have it more quantitative based, so that I can save you X% by following my product, you're more likely to stand out than doing a very qualitative, lengthy, verby, verbose kind of answer.
James Hocking is co-founder at Hocking Digital, and you can find him over at hockingdigital.com. James, thanks so much for adding your additional insight to SEO in 2025.
Thank you.
I've been your host, David Bain, and you've been listening to SEO in 2025 Additional Insights, a Majestic series that complements the original podcast, video series, and book. Find out more at SEOin2025.com.